Welcome to Convention Reviews. Today we'll be talking about Otakon 2024. This is a convention that occurs in Washington, D.C., and primarily focuses on anime and East Asian pop culture. It is also one of the largest anime conventions on the East Coast, which is pretty interesting. This particular convention takes place at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. Otakon was originally held in Baltimore, Maryland for many years, but moved to Washington, D.C. due to outgrowing its old venue. This year's Otakon was quite special because it was its 30th anniversary, which is really a milestone not only for the anime convention itself, but really as a fandom as a whole, considering there aren't many conventions that can boast even 20 years. Which really shows how strong of a community that this particular convention has built around itself. One thing that I will say that was really interesting to me was that if you bought your ticket far enough in advance, you could actually get it mailed to you ahead of the convention, so you didn't have to wait in long lines to pick it up, which really was a nice touch that I haven't really seen at a lot of smaller conventions in the past. But even still, they had a really well laid out registration line for people that were walk-ups as well, which was pretty cool. I ended up showing up to this convention on a Thursday afternoon and was able to catch the tail end of the Otakon Matsuri Festival. This actually was kind of cool because from what they had announced, this was actually the first year they had attempted to do this, which was a little bit of an outdoor festival to kind of have, bring in a lot of people that, had showed up early to get their badges, which was really a nice touch. And at this festival, they had people giving out stickers and fans, which were pretty cool. As well as they had a small stage for almost kind of like a little idol festival going on, which had a lot of people there kind of, getting people psyched up for the, convention, which was cool, learning how to, use the light sticks correctly, and as well as a couple other acts. One thing that was kind of fun was that they had one of the musical guests actually did a 20 to 30 minute warm up at the very end to just kind of, welcome in the convention, which, really was a nice way to kick off the event. Now, when it came to content for the overall convention, it definitely was quite massive. Just to put this in retrospect, there was 7 panel rooms, 3 video rooms, workshops, an AMV theater, as well as a main events area as well, not to mention the fact that there was a massive dealer's hall. But one of the things that for me brings me a lot of attention to these conventions is a lot of the fan panels, because for me it's really the lifeblood of a lot of these conventions. And I have to say there really was some really interesting as well as creative panels that I really hadn't seen at other conventions in the past. And I will say that, a lot of them really, ran the gamut from, anime to Japanese pop culture, Korean pop culture as well, which was really interesting. And I will say that, there definitely were some that were, absolutely knock it out of the park amazing, as well as there were some that were a little bit left to be desired at the same time. I know that from some of my friends who volunteered as well as tried to submit stuff for this year, competition was very difficult to get in. So the mere fact that anybody was able to get their panel submitted and accepted was really a lot higher bar than a lot of other smaller conventions. But there were a few panelists that I think did a really amazing job, in my opinion. One great example are my friends who did a panel kind of going over the different video formats that have gone out through the years for home video releases through the lens of animation, which was pretty interesting to say the least. There also was another panelist who did anime in the Philippines, which was a really interesting element to kind of look at it through that lens, because not only is a lot of animation done in the Philippines, but also the fact that there's a really interesting tie to the culture that isn't really just the repeat of sort of the American tale as well, which I found to be really fascinating. Another really professionally done panel was Hell on a Cell, which really did a lot of these interesting sort of fight scenes that were primarily done in the era of cell animation, though there were a handful of newer titles in there as well, which was really well put together, and really could tell that the person did a lot of research in putting these slides together, as well as giving people an idea of what the name of the series was if they wanted to look it up later. But I also like the fact that there also were many panels that didn't go into extremely esoteric territories as well. One example being there was a panelist who did a analysis on all the different kinds of dogs that are in different anime that was kind of fun to kind of break that down, as well as penguins in anime, which was also pretty interesting to say the least. So, as well as certain topics such as tsundere, which is a really popular uh, archetype in a lot of animation too. So, I will have to say there was some pretty cool stuff that I did see throughout the convention. My only real complaint with the fan panels was that I feel that a lot of the 18 plus After Dark panels were a little bit weaker than I would have expected. Some of the content seemed like it had a good beginning or topic, but it just wasn't really developed in a way that I feel was that entertaining to say the least. But there certainly were a handful also that were pretty interesting. Somebody had done like kind of a true crime podcast kind of thing with through the lens of like Japanese crime, which was pretty interesting to say the least. Was just to give an example of like a highlight. One of the nice features I saw at Otakon was the fact that they had 3 video rooms running throughout the entire convention. I will say that as a longtime fan, video rooms have unfortunately fallen out of favor, but it is nice to see the fact that, this convention really does still invest heavily in the medium. And, it was interesting to see that they had a lot of topics from, old time classics to more recent popular titles, as well as even going into some live action Asian cult cinema, which oftentimes is overlooked subject. Another really cool aspect of this convention was the game room, which was essentially the size of an airplane hangar. And I have to say, it was really one of the more interesting cases where they had so much selection of old arcade games as well as newer games and consoles, as well as tournaments going on. Really interestingly enough, though, they did have some Itashita vehicles towards the very back end of the convention center, which really was a really impressive collection of cars with their own wraps on them. I will say that due to the size of the convention, it made it look very small, even though there were quite a few vehicles there. But besides that, there actually was another interesting aspect, which was this was a gathering area for a lot of the cosplay groups where they had these really nice boards set up with different colorful backgrounds for the gathering of cosplayers, which really was a well organized, well put together set. Considering that a lot of the times when there are group photos, they tend to be not very well planned out. So to have it in a like safe, dry, and interesting background really was a nice touch that I oftentimes don't see at other conventions. One of the interesting side exhibits for this convention, which was pretty interesting, was that Otakon had a 30-year exhibit showing the evolution of Otakon over the years from the mid 1990s till the present. And, it really was cool because it showed a lot of the memorabilia and merch and pictures from those particular years. And, really kind of showed how the convention evolved, not only just in the amount of volunteers, attendees, but also just making major milestones of inviting guests and major milestones for the convention as a whole. But arguably one of the more interesting things that for me was the fact that there actually was a decent amount of time also put towards major volunteers that had unfortunately passed away over time, especially considering the convention had been running for 30 years. And, it's a really nice touch to see the fact that, so much time and attention was put towards the people that, contributed behind the scenes, whether they were, working at con ops or taking photos for the convention. And, it really is one of those things where it kind of puts together this whole community element that, that their contributions, really did have a major impact of, not only making a better show for that year, but, really having a lasting impact on, the people around them as well as, the community, even if they didn't know them directly, which, was a really nice touch. Another thing I really liked about this convention was the fact that it had a really well developed AMV theater, which ran the pretty much the entirety of the weekend, and really had some amazing new anime titles from a lot of different categories, and was a really competitive advantage to see so many different creative contributions. But the thing is there were so many different things that this was broken into, where they had uh, AMV contests that were completely dedicated to comedy. There was an AMV Hell, which was really kind of a almost meme machine, which was pretty fun. But probably one of the more interesting for me was the fact that they had a early 1990s AMV contest, which goes back all the way to the very beginning of the convention. And, it really was interesting to see some names pop up. One in particular was James Kapastas, who is oftentimes accredited to being one of the earliest AMV creators, which, was a really nice thing to see that, especially considering there weren't that many anime to work from for a lot of these AMVs from back in the day, which, really kind of adds an interesting kind of spice to it. I would also like to point out that the dealer's hall for Otakon was absolutely massive as well, similar to the game room. I don't think I have personally seen a selection from both vendors as well as Artist Alley as big as this particular convention, and really had a wide variety of fan merch. Interestingly enough, they also had a lot of industry based panels there as well, which really were promoting quintessential quintuplets as well as Blue Lock, as well as had the Japanese embassy was also there promoting tourism to Japan as well. Which I'll admit that even in the 3 days I was in Otakon, I only managed to see maybe about 50% of the overall space, which really goes to show you how massive this dealer's hall was. Moving on to main events, arguably one of the biggest guests at this convention was Studio Trigger. They were coming especially off of the heels of Delicious in Dungeon, which was a mega hit on Netflix in the last year, and really was interesting because they had brought two of the female animators along to kind of do a cell animation kind of thing of showing them how like they draw like a particular scene. And I will say that it was very fun to see them not only talk about their more recent works, but also going into some of their more past works as well. They also did the one of the pictures for Otakon this year, which was sort of this vaporware image, which was pretty cool, as well as had a little bit of stuff from Kill la Kill as well. Overall, it was a really fun event, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed themselves as a whole, and uh, really enjoyed the section. There had another one where they basically did like a hot pot, which also was very much of a interesting little thing. I didn't get a chance to attend it, but really kind of went into the fact that Studio Trigger still is kind of riding on a very strong wave even after 10 years, which is pretty cool. Another major guest that attended this year was Studio Orange, which also was famous for making Trigun Stampede, Beastars, Land of the Lustrous, among many others. This one was also a really interesting panel, had some of the animators there, and they were kind of going through their unique style, considering Orange is probably the biggest game when it comes to CGI anime out there, and continues to really knock it out of the park with their really unique art style, to say the least. Really, to show how jam packed this particular weekend was, they also had Square Enix as well as a lot of the English voice actors from Final Fantasy VII Remake, which was a major attraction at this particular convention, as well as they also had a number of musical acts throughout the weekend. One of the more noteworthy ones was Flow, which was a really popular band. Literally, you had to line up a couple hours in advance if you wanted to even get a chance to go see them on Saturday. So definitely worth the time if you're big into those bands. Unfortunately, I ended up missing it for other content. So really shows you how full Otakon really is. One of the last points I'd like to bring up about Otakon is that this weekend had a lot of really high quality cosplay from beginning to end. Arguably, the cosplay of the year has been Free Ren Beyond Journey's End. Quite a few cosplays, and this one in particular. One of my more favorite ones I saw was the Free Ren getting eaten by a mimic, which was quite popular. But there also were a lot of other really interesting cosplays there too. Golden Kamuy was also had a really large gathering, which isn't one I typically see at a lot of conventions, which was a really nice treat for me, especially considering I'm a bit of a fan of that franchise. As well as the fact that there was also some really cool old school anime there as well, such as Gunbuster and Full Metal Alchemist, to name a few. And this only really named a handful of really big titles that really were interesting to me, and really, like I said, was so many more amazing titles throughout the entire weekend. Overall, I had a really great time at Otakon, and it really is a convention I really want to go back to again next year or sometime in the near future. Really has a great collection of both new and old, and really appeals to almost every aspect of the fan base possible, which is really something that I really enjoy. The fact that it has a little bit of something for everyone. I will admit, I really uh, wish I could have gone to way more content than I was able to go to, but that's the great thing about going back again next year. And I definitely will say that if you're somebody that's been on the fence about going to Otakon, or uh, really wanted to go to a really good one, like this one is really worth your time and money, in my honest opinion. And that pretty much wraps it up for me for this Otakon review. Please like and subscribe. If you also went to this convention, please let me know your experiences, and look out for my next convention review.